Good morning, everybody. I just want to say hello and hope everybody's doing well. Maybe you're not watching this in the morning, but it's morning for me. Um, I'd like to do a screencast for our first online official lesson, and it's going to be a review. It's a review for me how to use the technology, as well as a review for you guys as far as the content goes. So hopefully it goes well, and we'll see what happens here. Again, we're living through an historic time, and hope you're all paying attention because someday the history books will be writing about you guys and me and what we're going through these last several weeks. So, if you recall, we were focused on the Civil War. The Civil War was fought over many things. You might recall states' rights and tariffs, different cultures, imbalance of political power, and radical abolitionists. So, as our country was working towards 1860, from 1800s to 1860, we were slowly dividing. An industrialized North was competing with and actually working with too, buying the cotton of the agricultural South. We had radical abolitionists like John Brown, who had gone down and tried to start a rebellion in Harper's Ferry. You might recall fighting in Kansas and fighting in the Congress, and just an overall fight over tariffs and states' rights, and again, just a growing imbalance of political power as the population of the North increased and the population of the South remained relatively stable as compared to the North. But ultimately, the one issue that could not be resolved in the 1860s was the issue of slavery. If we cut through all of those different causes, the one thing we just continually compromised over, the one thing that we continually fought over, was the issue of slavery. So that takes us to the election of 1860. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected, and there was a big divide between the different candidates over slavery. Lincoln said that he would not take away slavery and where it existed, but would not allow it to expand. The South, however, did not trust him, did not trust the North. They ultimately saw the writing on the wall politically that they would never win an election again, a presidential election, and so they decided to go their own way. Led by South Carolina, a total of 11 states seceded or broke away from the United States. You can note here that four border states remain in the Union: Kansas, Kentucky, Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, and Maryland. A final note is West Virginia. West Virginia during the Civil War broke away from Virginia over the issue of secession because they did not want to secede from the Union. That takes us to early war success. We learned about the Confederates being successful in the East. You might recall that, sorry about that, you might recall that Robert E. Lee was eventually put in charge of the defense of Richmond, and the capital of Richmond here of the South and the capital of the United States, the Union, Washington, D.C. Much of the fighting occurred between these two capitals, and in the East early on, the Confederates were quite successful. They won first Bull Run, they won the Battle of 7 Days, they won second Bull Run, eventually invaded into Antietam, and most historians strike Antietam as a tie, especially because McClellan for the Union did not chase Lee's army and defeat him completely. Meanwhile, the Union was successful in the West. So that was the kind of main lesson that we left off with before this whole virus vacation started. So I'm going to focus just for a little bit on the battles of the West, how the Union was successful in the West, right? Um, First off, at Forts Henry and Donelson, we had the Union working their way down north from the Union states to begin capturing the Mississippi River. This was all part of the Anaconda Plan. The forces out in this area were led by Ulysses S. Grant, and when he captured Fort Henry and they asked for what terms, he said nothing but unconditional surrender. And so eventually became one of his nicknames, Unconditional Surrender Grant, because his initials are US. So we've got Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, 1862, the Union. This began Union control of the Mississippi River, and Ulysses S. Grant got his nickname. Later on in April of 1862, as Grant and his army worked their way down the Tennessee River, working towards the Mississippi River, they encountered Confederate forces at a place called Shiloh, and Shiloh was the bloodiest battle of the war up to that point. It occurred over 2 days. On the first day, the Confederates basically overran the Union and drove them back to the Tennessee River. Overnight, the Union got reinforcements, and Grant counterattacked the following day and managed to drive the Confederates from the field. You might also recall this was the battle where the Hornets' Nest took place, where the bullets were flying around so much around soldiers in the central part of the battle, they said it sounded like they were standing in a hive of bees. So you've got Shiloh. This is April 1862. This is the Union, and this would continue the Union's control of the Mississippi River. So Grant and his army would continue heading southward. Meanwhile, from the south, for the Union, we have the Union Navy led by a Admiral Farragut, and they wind up sailing and attacking New Orleans because they're going to begin controlling the Mississippi from the south. This was the fight where they quickly sailed by with their ships covered in mud and trees lashed to the masts and stuff to disguise the ships, and they quickly got by the defenses that were protecting New Orleans, captured New Orleans, and so this would begin Union control of the lower Mississippi or the southern Mississippi. Following wins by Farragut at Natchez and Baton Rouge. Eventually, Farragut and Grant would meet up at Vicksburg, and the Battle of Vicksburg would take place. Basically, Vicksburg's up on a hill on the Mississippi River, very tough to get to. And after several different strategies and tactics, eventually the Union would surround Vicksburg and settle into a siege, forcing Vicksburg to eventually surrender because they ran out of supplies. So that would be Vicksburg. This is May, July of 1863. Notice it's not a single date because it occurred over a period of time. The siege occurred over a period of time. And once the Union controls Vicksburg, which by the way happened the day after Gettysburg, we'll learn about in a future lesson, the Union had now control of the entire Mississippi. And again, I've said it before, although many people consider Gettysburg the turning point of the Civil War, you could certainly make a strong case also for Vicksburg, that once Vicksburg was captured and the Union controlled the whole Mississippi River, it would be the beginning of the end for the South. All right. Lastly, we have a couple just far western battles, some battles that occurred, and we don't even need to know them by name per se, but the idea here is that these other western battles were won by the Union. The Confederates were defeated, but it did occupy Union force the Union to spread out and not focus necessarily all their energy on the Confederates. So I gave you a real short version of that because we did learn that in class before. I was just trying to refresh your memory. What I hope you do is listen to this video, and then I have a comprehension check, which is a quiz. It's just I'm not going to be grading it. I just want to see if you remember the 10 key ideas from this particular lesson. So if you could review those key ideas that we had from our last lesson, and then take the comprehension check, and we'll take a look at those scores. I'm actually going to open it up so you can take it as many times as you want until you get a 10 out of 10. That's fantastic. And then tomorrow we'll have a follow-up activity. So I hope everybody stays healthy and well, and your families are doing all right. And of course, if you need anything, please feel free to email me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you for listening, and have a good day.